Okay, hello, both of you. It's so great to see you. Storytelling and climate. Are you all ready to talk about it?
Let's do it, Patty.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Wow, I need my name said in that accent for forever and always. We love this. Okay, my first question for you in this 15-minute conversation is, climate is a very personal journey. How did each of you find your way to the climate movement? How have you seen your work really evolve and really, you think, make a difference in this world? What's it been like for you? Would love to hear kind of like how your tree sprouted. Yes, and Willow, as you are named after a tree, you can go
How
first.
did I know that you were going to do that? Well, my climate journey really began, I've always been a storyteller, and I spent most of my 20s working in publishing, but I was working mostly at arts and culture publications, and I was continuously kind of haunted by this question of what it would look like if we were to use so much of the creativity that I was surrounded by every single day towards a cause like the climate crisis. So some of you might have heard my much longer version of my climate story earlier today. I won't go into all of it, but I eventually kind of left that side of the publishing world and began a magazine called Atmos, which is a climate and culture publication. We tell story. Thank you. Yes, we can give it up for Atmos. We tell stories about the environment through a lens of creativity and the humanities, because I believe that the climate crisis is a crisis of heart, and the way that we reach people at a level of the heart is and has always been through the arts and through creativity. And so throughout the course of creating Atmos, it's just been such a gift and a joy to work with creatives all over the world who are so hungry to be able to use their artistry and their talent towards a cause such as this.
I love that, Willow. Thank you so much. Give it up for Willow, everybody. Yes. Oliver, how about you?
Well, I suppose I ended up engaged in this climate conversation because I was born where and when I was. And I've got eyes in my head and a brain inside my head and ears in the side of it. And I can see and hear what's happening, and it's obvious that it's changing rapidly. And I suppose my introduction into being quite vocal about this, there's probably lots of little steps, but maybe one of them has come from being a parent for the first time and trying to explain to my children that it's not going to go the way for you that it went for me, because everything is changing. But also then, and I don't know if anybody caught my talk in there earlier, it was like a big part of it I could see is that is an identity crisis, and it's this idea of being defined by an enemy, and so many people are pretending it's not happening because it doesn't suit them, and they feel that they're pitched against somebody. And so I think my role was to almost like clack people's heads together. I was like, wake up, it's not about you. It's not about you being right or being wrong. And to sort of say things are climate-related issues, I think is a terrible idea, because it gives people permission to ignore them. And everything is a climate-related issue. Doing your taxes is a climate-related issue. Playing chess is a climate-related issue, because you need a climate for any of this to happen. And so we got to stop relegating stuff over there into that big pile that can be ignored.
I love and appreciate that so much. Snaps for Oliver. Yes. Pop off, sis. That was amazing. And that is, wow, great. Okay, Willow, you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but I believe that a large part of the climate crisis is a communications crisis. And so I'm really wondering, what do you see as possible at that intersection of this crisis, and what's possible when we look at the future?
Well, as one of my favorite authors, Richard Powers, once said, you can't change a person's mind, only a good story can do that. And that has been kind of a guiding principle for me in my career throughout my life, because I do think, and Oliver mentioned this in his talk inside earlier, we do have a crisis of storytelling, right? There has been an idea, even you think about the concept of the carbon footprint, right? That's an idea that was created to make everyone focus on their own individual impact and distract people from the fact that there are also corporations that are responsible, and to try to shift blame, right? And so every way we understand this planet, every way we understand what we call the climate crisis, it all comes down to storytelling. And I often think about how ironic it is that we're obsessed with these big, blockbuster action movies, right? Where we see heroes and heroines trying to overcome some massive obstacle and come together to oftentimes literally save the world. And we're living that story, right? We're living it right now in a lot of ways. And there's parts of us that feel hungry for adventure, I think, all the time, but we are in the midst of a story, and in a lot of ways, a story that could be understood as a fable that we all can play a role in. And I think thinking about the climate crisis as a story that we are all co-authoring, it gives us the permission to change the narrative.
Thank you so much, Willow. Oliver, how about you?
What was the question again?
Yeah, when we think about climate and art as part of the climate crisis, it can often be a communication crisis as well.
Yeah,
so what have you seen right now at this moment, and when you're looking at the future?
I think that couldn't be more apt. And a big part of what we as artists do is it's about thinking of the stories that we're telling. But I think something that's often overlooked is think about who you're telling them to, and why. And like a case in point about how storytelling does work and also doesn't work. So do you remember in 2016, the election, the kind of the build-up to the election, that whole campaign? It was very vitriolic. It was very bitter. There was a lot of people shouting and angry at each other, and coal mining became like the poster child of the Republican sort of forgotten time, and a bunch of people got very angry because they're like, I'm a coal miner. Don't tell me what to do, and a lot of liberals never really got their head around the fact that why can they not see that burning coal is bad? It's ruining the planet. But imagine the story that had been told to those Appalachian communities hadn't been, you're irrelevant, but rather, thank you, that mission is now complete. We've got a new mission for you. So I think stories only work when they're including the people that you're telling them to.
I love that so much. And to piggyback off of that, I think a question I have for both of you, which wasn't a planned one, but I think you can be apt to speak to, is how can we in our practical day-to-day environments not just story tell better, but listen better?
That's it. I think, it's the, actually want to try and understand people, because are you listening to somebody, or are you just waiting your turn to speak? Are you trying so hard to be understood that you're forgetting to understand somebody else? It is this, I think you just gotta, to be more effective as a communicator, you gotta understand what other people actually do want. Not what they don't want, they'll tell you that, but what they do want. And if you just really try to deeply understand where somebody else is coming from, you will automatically do that. It'll sink in.
Love that.
Yeah, I love that, and it really also, I think, speaks to an aspect of being an artist and being a storyteller, which is collaboration. Most of the time when we tell stories, we are collaborating with other storytellers. And I'm thinking about my brother who's here, who's also a writer, and we collaborate on projects together. And when two storytellers are together and they're working on telling a story, you have to listen to the story that each of you are seeking to tell, right? It can't be individual, it's collective. And so when we're talking about the climate crisis, whatever that means, we're talking about the story of humanity, and that's one that we all have to author together, which can't happen if we're not actually listening to one another.
I love that. I'm from Nebraska. And
You're from a place.
I'm from a place, yes, believe it or not.
Me too!
And being from a place, I am from a place that has brought me around a lot of people that think very differently than me. I have a lot of family members who might think very different than me. And I was thinking about what you were saying about, the audience we're telling it to. I no longer am sitting at the adult table and trying to change those minds. I'm sitting at the kids' table. And I think we need to think more about that audience. And also, I'm trying to listen to those kids.
Yeah.
Because it can be really easy for us, especially in our climate work, to start to think that we know it all. But I think if we can remain curious, we can really start to change the game. And I really appreciate the curiosity in you both. And I am wondering, what I would love to listen and to hear about is, what advice do you have for everyone to be a storyteller in their lives? Maybe for some young storytellers that are out there right now, people that are just getting into this work. What would you tell them? What do you wish you knew when you were starting out?
It's like to be an artist or a storyteller, it's almost sort of counterintuitive advice. It's art, I think, is one of the few industries where the more selfish you are, the more generous you are. So if you are willing to be publicly vulnerable, that allows people in. Whereas if you're trying to think, what do people want to hear, and then pandering to that, you're just going to make art or tell stories that are sort of dull and predictable. And somebody once said the next big thing is never a repeat of the last big thing. Yet publishing industries and film industries constantly make that mistake. It's like, just be you and willing to show how vulnerable you are and how you feel about the world in a way that you understand it, rather than trying to, I don't know, give people what they want, or trying to don't try to convince anybody of anything. Just be very vulnerable, and people will take from it what they will.
Yes, I love that you said vulnerable. I think, a principle that I really live by is you don't have to worry about telling a perfect story, just an authentic one. I think authenticity is what resonates more than anything else.
Yeah.
And I think, especially when we're kind of early in our careers as storytellers, there's so much pressure to get everything perfect and everything right. And I think what's so much more important is the heart that you put into it, the fact that it comes from something true. I think whether you're telling fiction, whether you're a journalist, whether it's whatever it is, there's always some element of truth that inspires it. Even I always love Neil Gaiman said, fiction is how we tell truths through lies, right? There's always a starting place that comes from something deep and resonant and authentic. And I think that's the most important thing to hold on to, is what is the inspiration for you? What is the authenticity behind the story that you're trying to tell?
I love that. We have a little bit more time, and I'd love to throw out a more open-ended question for both of you, which is, what feels important to share right now as storytellers? What feels important to share to these people listening in this audience here at Bloomberg? What feels very on your mind and in this moment? You've probably seen other sessions today. You gave your sessions. What feels like it's percolating at the top of your little human ecosystems?
Well, I think we gotta get behind one single story. I think is one of the more important things that we need to do. Like, these conflicting stories that counteract each other are actually spreading more harm than doing good. And as the last slide that I showed when I was in there is that we have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We're not going to survive if we don't start doing that. So there's got to be a way where we can agree on a shared history that we all can believe in, and we have to remember the new story that we're telling of effectively how we have to remember how to be good ancestors. That it's not just about me right now in this short attention span of 40 characters or less. It's about generations from now and generations from that.
Yeah, and I think, what that makes me think of is that identity itself is a story in a lot of ways, right? The way we draw lines within our understanding of the world, even just from a scientific perspective, right? Like, we draw lines between different species, we draw lines between different members of an ecosystem, and that all serves a purpose, which is how we study and how we learn from the world around us. But it's also arbitrary. You see a forest, and it's a forest, but then there's also an individual tree, and then there's also families of trees, there's mother trees. And so when you start to understand identity as being this thing that is a little bit arbitrary. I mean, I'm Willow, I'm a person, right? But also I'm made up of over 1,000 different species of things, and of different microbes and bacteria and fungi. And okay, so where does the boundaries of identity really begin and end? And so I think, to the spirit of what Oliver shared, I think the more we can walk away from experiences like this and recognize our differences and our different backgrounds and learn from each other and hear from each other, and also understand that we are one species, that we are all part of this larger living entity that we call the Earth, I think it will be in the best interest of everyone.
I love that so much that you both brought that up, and I think that really echoes what we heard from Shia last night around the fact that, we are not separate from nature, we are a part of nature, this indigenous perspective of being a part of a whole. And that feels really beautifully reflected in what you both shared right here, because mother is mother, and mother is a lesbian, yes? Yes, we even got a laugh out of the straight person. That's amazing. This is great. Okay, this has been an incredible conversation, but how about a reading of some of their work? Would you like to hear that? Okay, I'm going to get off the stage, and who wants to go first? Willow? Okay.
I think I'm going first.
I think you are going first. Okay, so Willow, do you feel prepared and ready to read, or do you need to grab some things?
I feel great. I have my book. It's right there.
Oh, my gosh.
I know,
wow.
Amazing.
A planned queen. You can always count on gay people. Amazing. All right, well, make some noise for this incredible panel, Oliver and Willow. Yes, and Willow, please take it away.
Right.
Make some noise for Willow, everybody.
Gonna do my best not to stand in the sun.
Yes, please go to the shade.
So earlier this year, we published a collection of my writing. It's called The Overview: Meditations on Nature for a World in Transition. And it's a collection of essays I've written for my newsletter of the same name, in which I look to different species and processes of the natural world for different lessons about how to navigate the very messy experience of being human. So this is a edition called Incomplete Metamorphosis. I must finally realize that I am subject to these sudden transformations. A crowd of small metamorphoses accumulate in me without my noticing it, and then, one fine day, a veritable revolution takes place. Jean-Paul Sartre. When we think of transformation, we often think of insects like moths and butterflies that undergo what's known as complete metamorphosis, a process in which the insect's morphology radically alters between 4 clearly defined stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. It is in the pupa phase, the chrysalis or cocoon, where most of our metaphors of metamorphosis are born, where the larva liquefies and becomes something else entirely. In the world of insects, however, another form of morphology exists. It's called incomplete metamorphosis, and it is no less worthy of wonder. Rather than a defined, dramatic shift, incomplete metamorphosis consists of an array of gradual changes over an insect's life cycle. There is still an egg, larva, and adult, but no pupa phase in which the creature is entirely unmade. Instead, the larva will molt, shedding its exoskeleton many times on its journey to maturation. Of the many insects that undergo incomplete metamorphosis, perhaps the most remarkable are those of the Odonata order, which includes dragonflies and damselflies. Dragonflies demonstrate what entomologists identify as hemimetaboly. I'm not a scientist, I just write about science, okay? Though they never go through a pupal phase, their life still consists of a great transformation. They spend their youth as aquatic insects, gradually growing and molting underwater until adulthood calls them from below the surface to the sky. Known as nymphs or naiads, aquatic dragonfly larvae spend anywhere from 1 to 6 years developing underwater, depending on the species. On average, a nymph will molt between 6 to 15 times until it is fully grown, each time taking on a more of a resemblance to its eventual resplendence. When it is ready for its final transformation, it climbs out of the water, begins to breathe air, and trades its weight once more, this time to spread its wings. Dragonfly nymphs and naiads get their names from the nature spirits of ancient Greek mythology. Naiads in particular are water spirits, which is fitting considering how magical these fairy-like and often iridescent insects are. And dragonflies are similarly ancient. The oldest known Odonata fossil are 325 million years old, making them one of Earth's oldest flying insects. In Homer's Odyssey, nymphs such as Calypso are entwined with time too, drawing out Odysseus' long journey home. Within the climate movement, we know the frustrations of incremental evolution all too well. It's a constant point of tension. We urgently need a radical transformation of our relationship to the Earth, and yet we must also recognize that the systems and institutions we operate within cannot be easily undone overnight. As Audre Lorde put it, revolution is not a one-time event. It must be continued and sustained. So we itch and push for progress and policy reform, ever inching towards a future where we might break above the waves and leave this old way of being behind. Some transformations take place overnight, but not all. Much like the dragonfly, the majority of our metamorphoses are much less momentous, and yet they are equally important to our overall development. Just as society doesn't revolutionize instantaneously, neither do we individually. We grow imperfectly, incompletely. I'm talking about the subtle shifts, the months of molting, swimming beneath the surface, wondering what it's all for, until the moment arrives when you rise above the water, only to realize that all the while you thought that you were drowning, You were learning how to fly. Thank you. And if everyone could please welcome back to the stage, Oliver.
Thank you. Do you all want to hear a story? I'm going to read a little bit of my picture book, Begin Again. Actually, no, I'm going to read the whole thing because it's a picture book. It's called Begin Again, a map of our past and guide for our future. Where did we begin? With fire, I suppose. The surprise of fire changed our path explosively. It moved us up the ladder. It freed the energy from our bellies to our brains that would create words, see patterns, tell stories, invent the future. No, wait, we began before that. We began with our hands. We needed to light those fires somehow. We picked up debris, put it together, and made tools. A stick and a stone bound to each other became a hammer. Somewhere along the road came a wheel, a drill, a phone, a space rocket. We used these things at first to simply survive, then to explore, then control, then play. For the first time, we had time. Time to consider beauty, to make, for the pleasure of making, live without thought of death. No, wait, really, we began before even that. When we emerged on dry land, stood on 2 feet, put one in front of the other, and kept walking. It is our feet that take us where we want to go. But where do we want to go? If the predictions were true, we'd be living in space by now, all of us. Beyond the air we breathe and heading further yet. Our sustenance coming from pills. But we're not. We're still here on this dry land where we've always been, on which we have now drawn imaginary lines so we know who we are and who we're not, where we belong and where we do not. Taking what we want when we want it. The kings of our castles, on our islands of isolation, admired by strangers, safe from those strangers. And remember, in a world full of strangers, we all need to come from somewhere. Though when you look from far enough, it is clear that we all come from Earth. So there is only us. We seek only earthly contentment. After all, we're still simple creatures, which is why we are drawn to an open fire, the sound of a violin, why we embrace the touch of wood and warm light. People like to feel warm, both on the skin and in the heart. Really, what we mostly want is each other. When you think about it, we enjoy giving the right thing more than having it. And the first thing we do after laughing at a good joke or hearing a good story is think, who can I tell it to? That's how it always was. The slow passing of stories to and for each other. Stories that give us safe harbor and an idea of where we fit in this long line of time. Somewhere along that line, it has all started to speed up. The future shortened to the limitations of our own life. This life in which we alone are cast in the starring role, the center of all attention. So where does that bring us? Where are we going again? Well, we don't know where, but it's a race now to get there. Feet running one in front of the other towards easier, faster, newer, cheaper. And as we race, we use these same hands that build space rockets to hold each other back and pull each other down, choosing time and again that it's more important to be right over wrong than be better over worse. The difference between right and better is that being right is about proving the past, while being better is about building the future. And we should know by now that while it's wise to keep an eye on the past, because we often repeat our mistakes, if we keep both eyes on the past, we are blind, because we're not going that way. So where are we going? Is our current course worthy of turning thoughts into hammers and hammers into beauty? Maybe not. All right, so where do we go from here? Perhaps to a place where we find new ways of using the old ways. The heat from the stars, the movement of air and water, using what we find near us to make with the future in mind. For purpose and love, not power, for there's already power everywhere. Perhaps to a time when we no longer need to burn the ship we are sailing on to propel us. When we no longer need a them so we can be us. As we are just we. And wherever we go, we all go together. So all of us must see. We're no longer just passengers on this ship. We're its only crew. We each have a part to play. We may not be cogs in the machine, designed to be replaceable parts, but we are trees in the forest. No one more important than any other. Okay, if that's all true, then how do we get there? By slowing down, by telling better stories, bigger ones, where we all fit inside the same powerful plot, in which we think beyond our own lifetimes, beyond our children's, and theirs, 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 and theirs. And it's okay to walk there, mostly, for there is wild beauty on this life on earth, and hope wherever you look for it. Thank you very much.